The dawn of May 19th, 1536, broke cold and colorless over the Tower of London. Within those gray walls, a queen waited for death. Anne Boleyn, once the most powerful woman in England, sat quietly in her chamber, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the barred window where light barely reached. Her hair, unbound and dark as raven's wings, framed a face pale with exhaustion yet strangely composed. Outside, the chill mist rose from the Thames like ghostly hands reaching for her. This was no ordinary morning. It was the last sunrise she would ever see. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more dark, untold histories. All through the night, Anne had prayed. Whispers of her voice had mingled with the sighs of the wind. She had confessed her sins to her chaplain, Thomas Cranmer, and forgiven her enemies, though she knew few would forgive her. Betrayed, condemned, and abandoned, she was to be executed not by the axe of an Englishman, but by the sword of a Frenchman. King Henry's last gesture of mercy. Mercy. The word had become a mockery. How could mercy exist where love had turned to hatred and a crown had turned to a curse? Anne's story had begun with a crown of promise, sparkling jewels, whispered alliances, and a dangerous ambition that had reshaped England itself. She had dared to capture the heart of King Henry VIII, to challenge the Church of Rome, and to birth a new order. But every crown comes with a shadow. Now, those same courtiers who once bowed before her name would watch her fall. Her downfall was not swift. It was orchestrated, a performance of betrayal and politics masked as justice. How could one woman become both the kingdom's temptation and its scapegoat? The charges against her were grotesque: adultery, incest, and high treason. Her supposed lovers, Mark Smeaton, Sir Henry Norris, and even her own brother, George Boleyn, had already been executed. Their blood had darkened the scaffold only 2 days before, and knew their deaths were the king's warning. Still, she did not cry. She did not beg. Historians say she only smiled, sadly, faintly, as if already beyond the reach of earthly cruelty. "I am prepared," she whispered, "to meet my God." Her faith, whether born of fear or strength, would be her only companion at the end. As the hours passed, the tower seemed to breathe around her, a living thing built on secrets, moans, and prayers. The guards who once bowed now avoided her gaze. Even her ladies in waiting trembled, their eyes red from weeping. At every creak of the door, Anne thought she heard her summons. Yet death delayed its call. The French swordsman, specially brought from Calais, had not yet arrived. And so she waited. Every heartbeat became a tolling bell, every minute a ghostly reminder of life slipping away. Waiting was its own torture. The air within her chamber was thick with incense and fear. Outside, London's murmurs grew louder, the gossip of a kingdom hungry for blood. Vendors and peasants whispered Anne's name like a curse. The Witch Queen, they called her, who bewitched the king and brought ruin to England. The irony was bitter. It was her wit, not witchcraft, that had elevated her. Her intelligence, her confidence, her refusal to bow, these had once been her crown. Now, they were her crimes. What happens to women who shine too brightly in a world built for men? By mid-morning, the lieutenant of the tower came. His eyes were kind but heavy with sorrow. He told her it was time, and rose from her knees, steadying herself. "I hear the executioner is very good," she said softly, "and I have a little neck." Her hand brushed her throat as she laughed, lightly, almost playfully. It was a haunting sound, one that made the lieutenant's hands tremble. She would not let them see her fear. Not now. Not after everything. A queen's dignity was all she had left to give. They led her from her chamber into the open courtyard. The morning air struck her face, cold, sharp, and alive. The tower green was already prepared. A straw-covered scaffold stood at its center, surrounded by a small gathering: soldiers, nobles, and a few loyal servants. There would be no great crowd. King Henry had ordered her death to be private, swift, and silent. Yet Anne knew the whole of England was watching in spirit. She walked gracefully, her white gown glowing faintly in the dim light, her headdress replaced by a simple linen coif. Those who saw her that day would never forget it. One eyewitness said she moved as if to a festival, not to death. Her composure unsettled even her enemies. When she reached the scaffold, she knelt and prayed once more. "O Lord, have mercy on me," she said. To thee I commend my soul. No bitterness, no accusation, only surrender. She did not curse Henry, nor those who had betrayed her. Perhaps she believed her innocence would live longer than her body. Or perhaps she knew that, in death, she might win back her name. The French executioner stood waiting, his sword gleaming like frozen light. Unlike the English axe, the sword promised swiftness, one clean stroke. He bowed deeply to the fallen queen and smiled faintly, thanking him in perfect French. Then she turned to the small audience. "Good Christian people," she began, her voice clear and steady. "I am come hither to die, according to the law. I accuse no man. I pray God save the king." It was a performance of grace and restraint, words carefully chosen to protect her daughter, Elizabeth, from the shadow of her mother's shame. Her final speech silenced the wind itself. Even the soldiers looked down as she finished and removed her headdress and tucked her hair beneath the white coif. Her ladies wept openly now, unable to contain the grief that had been held for days. "I do not wish to be bound," she said quietly, refusing the ropes. Then she knelt upon the straw, folding her hands in prayer. "To Jesus Christ, I commend my soul," she whispered. "Lord, into thy hands." Her lips trembled, but her voice did not. The calm before eternity. The executioner signaled for silence. He stepped lightly behind her, his sword hidden from her view. It was said that he cried out, "Bring me my sword," to distract her, and in that split second, when she turned her head slightly, the blade flashed. One stroke, a clean severing of flesh, bone, and destiny. Her head fell forward into the straw, her body collapsing gently beside it. A gasp rippled through the onlookers. The deed was done, and Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, was no more. Her blood darkened the straw, warm and fleeting as breath. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the silence broke. The lieutenant stepped forward, tears in his eyes, and lifted her lifeless body. Her head was placed in a simple elm chest. No royal procession, no funeral bells, just the hollow echo of boots retreating from the scaffold. Anne's remains were buried in an unmarked grave within the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula. A queen, stripped of title and memory, laid among traitors and thieves. Yet her story did not die there. It whispered through the corridors of history like an unfinished prayer. King Henry received word of her death that very morning. According to chroniclers, he was out hunting when the news arrived. They say he smiled. By afternoon, he was preparing to marry Jane Seymour, the quiet, docile lady who would bear him a son. For Henry, Anne's death was not an ending but a convenience. To him, she was another chapter closed, another pawn sacrificed to secure his legacy. But history has its own way of balancing the scales. Centuries later, it is Anne's name, not Henry's cruelty, that still commands our fascination. Why was her death so terrifying, even by Tudor standards? Because it was not just the execution of a woman. It was the public execution of love, ambition, and faith. Anne's rise and fall revealed the fragility of power in a world ruled by kings and governed by fear. One day, a crown rested upon her head. The next, a sword rested upon her neck. Her story became a mirror reflecting the peril faced by any who dared to dream too high. How many more would fall before learning that lesson? Even after her death, rumors refused to rest. Some swore that on stormy nights, Anne's ghost roamed the Tower Green, head held beneath her arm, eyes still open in silent accusation. Others whispered that the wind carried her sighs across the Thames, whether ghost or legend, and became immortal in ways her enemies could not silence. Every stone of the tower bore her memory, every shadow carried her voice. She had lost her life, but not her legacy. And perhaps that was her final triumph, to haunt the history that had condemned her. The women of England took quiet notice. Though few dared speak her name aloud, they understood what her fall meant. Power, once thought unreachable, had been touched by a woman's hand and punished for it, and had challenged not just a king, but an entire order built on obedience. She had risen through intellect and charm, not birthright. Her death reminded them that brilliance was a double-edged sword, admired when it served, feared when it defied. What, then, was the cost of a woman's voice in a world ruled by silence? In her final hours, Anne's thoughts must have wandered to her daughter, the infant Elizabeth. Would she ever know her mother's name? Would she grow up loved or cursed? No one could have foreseen that the little girl, born under such scandal, would one day reign as one of England's greatest monarchs. History has a cruel but poetic sense of justice. The same throne that condemned and would later belong to her bloodline. The crown that destroyed her would be redeemed by her child. Perhaps, in death and sacrifice found its meaning. Anne's trial, though called lawful, was a theater of vengeance. Witnesses were coerced, evidence fabricated, verdict predetermined. Her very words were twisted into daggers. One ambassador wrote, "Never was there such injustice." But injustice was the language of courts built by kings, and stood alone before her judges, a woman against the machinery of monarchy. Her voice, clear and defiant, echoed through the chamber. "If I am guilty, may my sin fall upon my head. If I am innocent, let my enemies bear the blame." It was both a prayer and a curse. To understand her terror, one must imagine the tower itself. Its walls were soaked in centuries of screams, betrayals, and executions. The smell of damp stone and iron hung heavy. Every footstep echoed like a drumbeat of doom. Within that fortress, even silence was a sentence. Anne's cell overlooked the scaffold. She could see where others had fallen before her. Each night, she heard the clatter of swords, the cries of ravens, the whispers of ghosts. Death was not sudden. It was a slow, deliberate haunting. Yet amid that horror, she showed grace few could fathom. In the hours before her death, she comforted her ladies, thanking them for their service. "Do not weep," she told them, "for I go to a better place." Such words came not from despair, but from a strange, luminous peace. Some say she saw beyond the veil, that her soul had already left her body. The chaplain who attended her swore she faced death with a courage born not of pride, but of faith. Perhaps courage is what remains when all else is stripped away. Outside the tower, London stirred with uneasy curiosity. Some pitied her, others rejoiced. The public had turned against their queen long before her trial. They blamed her for the king's cruelty, for England's break with Rome, for every sin that wore the crown's name. Yet many forgot. It was Henry, not Anne, who sought her rise, who dismantled his kingdom for her. History, in its irony, always spares the powerful. The woman bears the burden, the man rewrites the tale. And so Anne died condemned by the very love that once made her a queen. That morning, her chaplain had asked if she feared death, and smiled faintly. "I have been preparing for it all my life," she said. "Death is but a moment. Glory is eternal." Her words lingered long after the sword had fallen. For centuries, historians have debated whether her composure was faith or defiance. But perhaps it was both. To die with dignity was the last rebellion left to her. When power abandons you, the way you meet your end becomes your final act of power. The French swordsman, whose name history forgot, was said to have been shaken by the task. Before the execution, he knelt to pray. He asked forgiveness for the life he was about to take. "It must be quick," he murmured, "for she is a lady." And it was. The stroke was so clean that Anne's lips were still moving in prayer as her head fell. The sight haunted him until his dying day. It was said he never again lifted his sword without seeing her face in the gleam of the blade. After her burial, the tower grew strangely still. The ravens perched on the battlements, silent for days. Even the guards refused to linger after dusk. The legend says her ghost appeared at midnight, walking the tower corridors in her white gown, carrying her head like a lantern. The scent of lilies followed her steps. Whether myth or memory, the story persisted because it felt true. In every empire that forgets mercy, the ghosts of the unjustly slain rise to remind us. Anne's spirit became England's conscience, unseen but never absent. Years later, when her daughter Elizabeth ascended the throne, the tower bells rang not for death but coronation. The child of the condemned queen now ruled the realm that had murdered her mother. In that moment, Anne's legacy was reborn. The woman who had died branded a witch and traitor became the mother of a golden age. The crown that cost her life became her vindication. History does not forgive easily, but sometimes it whispers redemption through the bloodline of the wronged. And Boleyn's story endures not because of her death, but because of what she symbolized. She was ambition, intelligence, and courage in an age that punished women for all three. Her tragedy lies in her brilliance, her audacity to be seen and heard in a world that demanded silence. Every woman who dared to think, to lead, to challenge, their voices echo Anne's. Her execution was not the end of a queen, it was the birth of a legend written not in ink, but in blood. 500 years later, her tale still grips us, not for its romance, nor its politics, but its humanity. The trembling breath before the sword falls, the quiet dignity of a woman meeting her end with grace, the haunting realization that power and love can destroy as easily as they create. When we think of Anne Boleyn, we see not just a queen, but every soul who dared to defy their fate, every heart that burned too brightly in a world afraid of light. As the camera fades to the cold stones of the tower, imagine her voice one last time. I was the queen, and I was loved once. Her story is not merely a relic, it is a mirror. It reflects our fear of power, our hunger for justice, and our endless fascination with the fallen. And in that reflection, we find something timeless, the tragedy of being human, the fragility of glory, the price of ambition, the beauty of defiance. If this story moved you, remember her name. Remember how a woman condemned by her king became immortal in history. And Boleyn's death was not an end. It was a warning, a lesson, and a testament. Her courage outlived her crown, her legacy outshone her accusers, and her bloodline changed a nation. Like, subscribe, and join us in the next chapter of history's darkest hours, where love, power, and death are never far apart. Until then, look to the shadows. The past is never as silent as it seems.